This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Opening my eyes, and here's this guy, the bedroom door. And the door's open about this wide, looking straight down at me. So I freaked. I jumped up with my pistol and said, "Get the f*** out of my house."
We've talked about squatters before, but the landscape is changing. States are enacting laws that make it easier to evict them. Some states want to make squatting a criminal act. I'm Jim Grinstead, and today we'll talk about how squatting is changing and where lines are being drawn. We'll talk about squatter associations and real estate sellers who are taking up arms against them. Squatting is no longer a matter of isolated instances. The movement is growing, and you'll need more than locks and keys to keep your property from being overrun. Here are the basics of squatting. One or more people scout out a home or building that's been unoccupied for some time. It may be years in the case of a factory building, or for a couple of weeks in the case of a family vacation. The squatters move in, create a fake lease, and may even change the locks on the door. When the owner arrives, they find unexpected guests who refuse to leave. They call the police, who say it's a civil matter, and the rightful owner must go to court to prove they are the rightful owner and that the people occupying the building should leave. The process can take months, and having a false lease could stretch it out even longer, as it must be verified. The burden of proof is on the homeowner, not the squatters.
Sure, we're talking about those empty houses that are being used by partiers and squatters, and it's made for some unsafe conditions out here and a hell of a mess.
It was a call of a woman screaming that brought police to this hillside mansion on Sunset Plaza, and these three people were removed from it and handcuffed.
It's an abandoned house. They're just trespassing.
Now, this is a home that once listed for more than $10 million, but is now covered in graffiti and littered with debris and feces, and what used to be million-dollar views are painted over.
That was KTLA in Los Angeles. While on the other coast in New York City, 90-year-old Rabbi Meyer Leifer gave Rosalie Moskowitz a place to live when she found herself temporarily homeless during the pandemic. She then just stayed and refused to leave. Moskowitz reportedly occupies the rabbi's living room and sits on the couch watching his television. Since he invited her in, it's up to him to evict her. Even when the property is occupied by squatters, legal owners can't turn off the power or water, leaving them to pay for utilities that the squatters use. CBS Sacramento told the story of a squatter who rented a portion of the house to family members. The family members dutifully paid $800 a month rent. That left lawyers scrambling to figure out what to do with people who believed they were renting from a legitimate landlord and were current on their rent payments. Then there are times when squatting gets deadly. Los Angeles Magazine told the story of Carolyn Hurling. She would identify people who died in the recent past, drive through affluent neighborhoods where they lived, and look for signs of property neglect or abandonment. When she found one, she'd strike using her arsenal of fake identities, weapons, and forged documents to drain the victim's estate dry. In the fall of 2020, Hurling found her mark in Charles Wilding, an elderly man who had lived alone in his childhood home. She and her accomplices would eventually dismember his body and throw it in San Francisco Bay. But Wilding was not the only victim of Hurling's schemes. A second man, also a victim of her forgery, reportedly took his own life.
The Ford Explorer is America's all-time best-selling SUV. But we couldn't leave it at that, because you still have unmarked paths to pursue. So we gave it an available 400 horsepower engine. It's up to you what you do with that power. The 2025 Ford Explorer. It's all in the name.
Based on S&P Global Mobility 1946 to current U.S. total new cumulative registrations for all vehicles identified as SUVs. Horsepower and torque ratings based on premium fuel per SAE J1349 standard. Your results may vary.
¿Hablas español?
Sprichst du Deutsch?
Kann du Norsk?
If you've heard that sound from Babbel before, I bet you do. Babbel is the science-backed language learning app that actually works. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts, Babbel gets you on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. With over 16 million subscriptions sold and a 20-day money-back guarantee, just start speaking another language with Babbel. Right now, up to 55% off your Babbel subscription at babbel.com/Spotify podcast. Spelled BABBEL.com/Spotify podcast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Professional squatting has become a growing trend, with criminal rings scouring obituary pages and breaking into the homes of the dead. It's a problem that's only going to get worse, according to the LAPD. But what's even more disturbing is that the law often protects the victims. In California, a squatter can establish legal possession of a property by occupying it for 5 years without the owner's permission. And when caught, squatters don't often see jail time. I mentioned earlier that San Francisco is one of the more tolerant cities for squatters. But even in that city, groups share addresses from the San Francisco Department of Building Inspection's database to identify empty buildings. Squatting can bring about some strange situations, as CBS Sacramento explains.
She broke into the home. She then started living there since November of 2019.
Using the family's power, putting the waste management services in her own name, she even rented the place out.
She was pretending to be a landlord.
Charging her own family members $800 a month to live in the back house.
It's just one incredible lie after another.
When Lisa Marlowe heard the news about her mom's home, she drove up from San Francisco to confront Amanda Carlson face to face.
If you saw the property, if you walked around at all, it is a drug haven.
Amanda won't likely be back, but as for the tenants she was renting the property out to,
the police said that because they were paying her rent, they thought she was the lawful owner. They actually couldn't be forcibly removed.
Not surprisingly, legal owners and those impacted by squatters are looking for ways to solve the problem.
This no trespassing sign didn't do the homeowner any good. He says he was out of town and noticed his electric bill going up. That made him suspicious. But it wasn't until he arrived back at home that he realized what had happened. The day the homeowner got back in town, he says he saw his door ajar, the house disheveled, but no one there. He called police to report some stolen items, including an electric scooter, guns, tools, and documents like a social security card and the deed to his house. He decided to sleep in the closet just in case someone showed up.
This is Fox 35.
Open my eyes, and here's this guy at the bedroom door. And the door's open about this wide, looking straight down at me. So I freaked. I jumped up with my pistol and said, get the f*** out of my house.
The police report recounts the two arguing over who owns the house. The homeowner fired a shot into the floor.
Now he starts saying, you can't do that. You're going to jail. I'm going to call the police. I said, good, call the police. And he did.
He's the one who called police?
Yeah.
When police asked the homeowner if he wanted to press charges, he said at first he just asked if Brown could be trespassed.
I said, I don't want the guy to go to jail. He reminds me of my son in a way. Tall, skinny, too smart for his own good, and dumb as a bag of rocks at the same time.
And in Las Vegas, CBS 58 said Jermaine Pritchett walked into his house after being away from home a couple of months. He found things had been stolen and the property ransacked.
And just as he was on the phone with 911, Pritchett says one of the squatters came in. Not sure of what was going to happen, Pritchett grabbed his gun, shooting the person once.
And I was scared to death. I heard the noise,
because, nobody comes to my place without an invite.
Do you just go into people's places? So what if it's open? Is this yours?
No.
Do you pay rent here?
Video shared to us by Pritchett shows the aftermath, the squatter bleeding and denying breaking in.
Look what they did to my place.
When you're in that kind of a situation, you know that it is life or death.
Police showed up and took the squatter to the hospital. In their notes, they classified this as a self-defense. It didn't just stop there. Pritchett says the next night he caught someone else trying to break in.
I grabbed his arm as he was reaching in. I held him.
This incident has caused Pritchett to be stripped of his sense of security and safety.
I definitely feel 100% violent.
Pritchett said he had to plead with his apartment complex numerous times to change his locks, and then they finally did.
While Pritchett may have been defending his own house, and neighbors in Los Angeles were trying to cut down on the noise and destruction of a multi-million-dollar home, there's still others who want to keep squatters out. Real estate agents. Squatters can hurt property values and decimate a property before it goes on the market. According to KTNV, some real estate agents go to work packing heat.
They're trying to make a living showing and selling homes, but as realtors and agents unlock their properties, they're often finding an unwelcome surprise on the other side.
They were living here.
A quick peek to see what he's in for. Eddie Lavin armed with a gun as he approaches.
How are you feeling right now?
Pretty nervous.
He might look like an officer, act like a one-man SWAT team.
Anybody here?
But in a squatter paradise, this is just a day in the life of Nevada realtors.
Here's our lovely, wonderful squatters that get away with 100% of everything in his town.
A look inside the property these two share after they say a group broke in.
Obviously, they were here for an extended period of time.
Needles, drugs, a knife. This video taken moments after the face-to-face confrontation. Worst part, this now heavily damaged home is under contract.
Not surprisingly, some squatters see things differently. They are looking for housing, not a party house. In San Francisco, New York, and especially in Europe, squatters have formed organizations to plead the case that they occupy empty space because government has not provided adequate housing. They lobby political officials to make their case, but they also share addresses of properties that might be available. I tried to speak to a few of the European groups, and they quickly told me where to put my microphone. I said the acoustics weren't particularly good there. The San Francisco Tenants Union, known as Homes Not Jails, says on its webpage, Homes Not Jails was formed in 1992 to advocate for the use of vacant and abandoned housing for people who are homeless. With people literally dying on the sidewalks in front of vacant buildings, housing advocates, homeless advocates, and people who are homeless came together to find ways to utilize vacant buildings. It goes on to say, since the government has been slow to act to utilize vacant buildings for housing, and people need housing now, Homes Not Jails simultaneously opens up vacant buildings and helps people who are homeless move in. Since 1992, hundreds of these squats have been open. Many have lasted for years. And Homes Not Jails filed for legal ownership, after paying property taxes, of a squat that opened in 1993, a process known as adverse possession. Across the bridge in Oakland, California, there's a group called the Cardboard and Concrete Collective, which at the time of this recording was promoted by Nita B. The group was in an undisclosed space where unhoused people can create art. One member of the collective explained on its video what the group hoped to do.
The name of our art collective is Cardboard and Concrete. You got any stuff to say to folks about us coming together and as unhoused artists?
Like I said, it's going to be without boundaries. We're going to be allowed to extend whatever our mind tell us, whatever our imagination, including the hurt, trauma we done had to deal with under this, local politics, the city government, and the poverty pimps that claim they help us. So we got free reign and rule of our artistic expression. It's beautiful.
Nita B closes the video.
So today's a work day where we're setting up our space that we're going to be producing art out of. We'll be having a really big art show coming up in the next couple months, so stay tuned for that. For the unhoused to have a home to create. And if you're unhoused and you are an artist and serious about your art form, hit us up.
On the science side, a University of Michigan study presented to the American Sociological Association said squatters may be a good thing. Here's AI voice Jeff reading from the publication Science Daily.
It can actually be a good situation for a neighborhood to have these individuals move into abandoned homes, lessening the chance of them becoming sites for drug users or burned by arsonists. In urban communities nationwide, such as Detroit, which are experiencing population decline, homes have been abandoned by owners or left unattended by private investors who often purchase them in bundles of tens, hundreds, or even thousands. While attempts to revitalize a city rely on private ownership to induce responsible care for property, that isn't always an option, said study author Claire Herbert, a graduate of the University of Michigan, where she earned a PhD in sociology. Herbert, an assistant professor at Drexel University, interviewed more than 60 people, including squatters, city authorities, and residents between 2013 and 2015, while also gathering ethnographic data on illegal property use from various sources, such as community meetings and squatted areas across Detroit. Surprisingly, many of the residents in the study welcome squatters to keep abandoned homes occupied. Squatting, however, was not considered acceptable to residents if the home was still occupied or if the legal owner was maintaining and overseeing the property. But when there is minimal police or city oversight to enforce legal owners to maintain their vacant properties, neighboring residents seek solutions, Herbert said. Many forego involving the police or other city authorities to enforce legal ownership, but instead encourage responsible squatters in order to bring about the kind of positive impact that legal ownership is supposed to bring.
Despite what the University of Michigan has to say, homeowners and real estate agents aren't pleased about the squatting, and that means politicians must get into the act. Several states have banned or are working to make it easier to evict squatters. Some want to make it criminal.
It's almost unheard of for a bill to pass through the Florida legislature, both the House and the Senate, with unanimous support, everyone from both parties agreeing that something had to be done about squatting. And today, Governor DeSantis signed that bill into law.
Bill 5, drug fired, and officers down.
Police ended up in a shootout with a squatter in that Southwest Miami-Dade incident. And at this home in Miami, occupied illegally by squatters, they found a dead body last summer.
Someone broke into the house, they changed the lock, and they stay there like they own the property.
Marie Javier owns the house. She was having it renovated as a rental when squatters took over.
So they stayed in the property like for 2 months.
That's because once squatters move in, getting them out has been a civil matter, not a criminal case, so it took time. Up in Jacksonville, Patty Peoples captured her confrontation with squatters on video. It took months to get them evicted because they had a fake deed to the property, and they damaged the home extensively.
It is, quite frankly, one of the most frustrating, unfair experiences and frightening experiences of my life. The burden of proof was on me.
You assume in America, if you purchase a home and own a residence, that's your residence.
Governor Ron DeSantis signed the bipartisan anti-squatting bill today. It allows police to immediately remove squatters if they have broken in, if they've refused to leave, and if they're not a current or former tenant involved in a legal dispute.
You are not going to be able to commandeer somebody's private property and expect to get away with it. We are in the state of Florida ending the squatter scam once and for all.
Up the road in Georgia, WSB said more legislative action took place when Governor Brian Kemp signed a new law.
The Georgia Squatter Reform Act changes that. Now law enforcement must cite squatters criminally for trespassing, and that starts a clock ticking.
So they have no documentation. They'll be out in 3 days.
State Representative Devin Seabaugh sponsored the bill. Under the new law, if the suspected squatter presents a lease, the case goes before a magistrate judge within 7 days. A fake lease adds an extra felony charge.
These are criminals that know exactly what they're doing, and they're taking advantage of the loophole that we had in our law, and we've corrected that.
And just like squatters, homeowners have different points of view. So do governors. In Arizona, KVOA said Governor Katie Hobbs vetoed a bill that would have allowed homeowners to take a more aggressive approach to squatters.
Governor Katie Hobbs has vetoed another 10 measures, including a bill that would have set up new rules to deal with squatters. Senate Bill 1129 would have allowed law enforcement to immediately remove suspected squatters from a home. The homeowner would have had to fill out a sworn affidavit saying that the occupant is not a tenant. Police would then verify the property owner and remove the squatter. Democrats argue the bill could be used by domestic abusers to exert financial control over victims. Republicans disagreed and argued the legislation was needed to safeguard the rights of homeowners, especially since many snowbirds who leave their Arizona homes vacant for several months. The current process in our state for removing a squatter can get complicated and may involve the courts.
So here's where we are. Some squatters want to get off the streets and say government needs to do a better job. Other squatters just want a free place to crash, throw parties, use drugs, and trash the place before they're forced to move on. Homeowners are frustrated that they can't just throw the trespassers out themselves or have the police do it without paying high legal costs and investing a lot of time to do it. Real estate agents may believe they lower the value of a property, but others say responsible squatters can keep a neighborhood looking active rather than abandoned. If there's an answer, I couldn't find it. Laws could be passed to make it easier to evict squatters, but that doesn't do anything to reduce homelessness. Frankly, very little that's been tried has had much impact on homelessness. If things change, I'll be here to tell you about it. In the meantime, keep your doors locked, the lights on, and be sure the lawn is mowed. If you enjoy the podcast, please help us out by telling your friends and encouraging them to listen. Scams and Cons is available wherever podcasts are found, and at scamsandcons.com. If you could head over to Spotify and leave us a 5-star rating, it would be appreciated. Spotify listeners are more than half our audience, so it really does make a difference. Thanks for listening.
Scams and Cons is part of the Killer Podcast Network.